In the spring of 1796, a small, unimpressive man stepped down from a carriage in the south of France to take command of an army that nobody wanted. The army of Italy was a joke in Paris. It was ragged, hungry, months behind on its pay, and stuck on a stretch of barren coast, watching a far stronger Austrian and Piedmontese force hold the mountain passes above it. Its new commander was 26 years old. His senior generals were older, taller, and more famous, and several of them privately wondered whether this thin Corsican with the strange accent was a real soldier at all. Within a single year, they would follow him without question. Within 2, his name would be known from London to Cairo. This is the story of how a struggling general became a legend in the mud of Italy and the sands of Egypt. Welcome back to History with Rohrmann. This is episode 2 of our series, Napoleon Rise and Fall. In the last episode, we watched the French Revolution tear down an old world of kings and open a door for a poor outsider with a gift for war. We left him in Paris at the end of 1795, the man who had saved the government with a whiff of grape shot, rewarded with a command on the Italian front. Today, he turns that backwater posting into one of the most dazzling campaigns in military history, and then sails off on a far stranger adventure that will nearly destroy him. Let us pick up the thread. First, the bigger picture, because it is everything. France was still at war with the First Coalition, that alliance of monarchies horrified by the execution of their fellow king. The greatest of France's enemies on land was Austria, ruled by the Habsburg dynasty, the proudest royal house in Europe. Austria held vast territory, and crucially, it controlled much of northern Italy, a patchwork of small states, duchies, and the lands of the Pope. The masters of war in Paris had a plan, and Italy was not the main part of it. The real blow against Austria was supposed to fall in the north, through Germany, along the River Rhine. Italy was the sideshow, a place to tie down a few Austrian troops while the big armies won the war elsewhere. That is the command they handed Napoleon. They expected very little from it. There is one more thing to mention before he leaves Paris. Just days before he rode south, in March of 1796, Napoleon married a fashionable, elegant widow named Josephine de Beauharnais. She was older than him, well-connected, and at first far more in love with the idea of him than with the man. He, by contrast, was obsessed. He fired off passionate, almost desperate letters to her from the road, even as he prepared to fight a war. Keep her in mind, because Josephine will follow this story all the way to the throne. Now to Italy. When Napoleon reached his army, he found it in a pitiful state. So he did 2 things at once. He fixed the small, practical problems, food, boots, discipline, and he spoke to his soldiers in a way that the powdered generals of the old monarchy never would have. The famous version of his words may have been polished later, but the spirit was real. He told these starving men that he was about to lead them into the richest plains in the world, into great cities and fertile fields, where they would find honor, glory, and reward. He did not promise them duty. He promised them everything. And then, astonishingly, he delivered. His method was speed. The armies of the age usually moved slowly, dragging huge supply trains behind them, fighting careful, almost polite campaigns. Napoleon threw that away. He marched his men fast and light, living off the land they passed through, and he aimed not at capturing towns but at destroying his enemy's army. In northern Italy, he faced 2 opponents at once, the Austrians and their allies, the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia. A lesser commander might have split the difference. Napoleon did the opposite. He drove his army like a wedge straight between the 2 allies, keeping them apart, then turned and beat each one separately before they could combine. Within weeks, Piedmont was knocked clean out of the war and forced to make peace. 1 enemy down, and the campaign was barely a month old. That left the Austrians falling back across the rivers of Lombardy. And it brought Napoleon to a town called Lodi on the 10th of May, 1796. At Lodi, the Austrians held the far bank of a river behind a long, narrow wooden bridge swept by cannon fire. To cross it looked close to suicide. Napoleon massed his troops and sent them charging straight across that bridge into the guns, leading from the front to steady them, and somehow they took it. In cold military terms, Lodi was not the most important battle of the campaign. But something happened inside Napoleon there. He later said that it was at Lodi that he first began to believe he was not an ordinary general, but a man marked out by destiny to do great things. The legend was beginning to take hold in his own mind first of all. Days later he entered Milan, the great city of Lombardy, in triumph. And here we see the other side of these victories, the part the heroic paintings leave out. Napoleon's army paid for itself by taking from the lands it conquered. He levied enormous sums of money from the Italian states, and he stripped their palaces and churches of paintings, sculptures, and treasures, shipping them back to France by the wagon load. Some of the most famous artworks in the museums of Paris arrived as the spoils of this campaign. To Italians, it was plunder. To the Directory in Paris, suddenly this little sideshow was sending home gold and masterpieces while the main armies in Germany were stalling. Almost overnight, Italy became the war that mattered, and Napoleon became the general who mattered. But Austria was a great power, and it did not give up Italy easily. Again and again through 1796 and into 1797, the Habsburgs sent fresh armies down through the Alps to relieve their last great fortress in the region, Mantua, which Napoleon had placed under siege. For separate times they tried. For separate times he beat them. The fighting was hard, and at moments it went badly. In November of 1796 came the Battle of Arcole. 3 brutal days fought around another bridge and the flooded marshes near the river Adige. It was here that one of the most enduring images of the young Napoleon was born. The commander seizing a flag and rushing onto the contested bridge under fire to drive his men forward. The reality was messier and more chaotic than the painting suggests, but the story spread fast, and it was exactly the kind of story that turns a successful general into a hero. Then came the decisive blow. On the 14th and 15th of January 1797, near a plateau called Rivoli, Napoleon caught the latest Austrian relief army as it tried to converge on him along narrow mountain roads. Reading the ground and the enemy's movements with that same instinct we saw at Toulon, he concentrated his forces at the critical moment and shattered them. Rivoli broke Austrian power in Italy for good. Within weeks, the fortress of Mantua finally surrendered. The Austrians had thrown the best they had into northern Italy, and a 27-year-old had beaten all of it. Now Napoleon did something remarkable for a general who was, on paper, just following orders. He marched north, through the Alps, toward Austria itself, driving for Vienna. And the Habsburg Emperor, with his armies in Germany unable to save him in time, decided he had had enough. The result was the Treaty of Campo Formio, signed on the 17th of October, 1797. By its terms, Austria gave up its claims in the Low Countries and recognized French power in northern Italy, where Napoleon had begun reorganizing the conquered states into new French-friendly republics. In exchange, and this is telling, he handed Austria the ancient and independent Republic of Venice, 1,000 years old, traded away like a bargaining chip. With Campo Formio, the first coalition was effectively finished. Of all the monarchies that had united against France, only Britain was still in the fight, untouchable behind its navy. Stop, and consider what had just happened. The Directory had sent Napoleon to Italy as an afterthought, partly to get an ambitious young general out of the capital. Instead, he had knocked the most powerful land empire in Europe out of the war, more or less on his own initiative, and he had negotiated the peace terms himself, as if he were not a soldier taking orders but a sovereign power in his own right. He was now, without question, the most famous and most successful general in France. And the men who ran the country were beginning to realize they had a problem. The young general was becoming too big to control. So what do you do with a hero you are afraid of? You give him a glorious mission far, far away. Britain was the last enemy standing, but Britain could not be reached. The Royal Navy ruled the seas, and a direct invasion across the Channel was judged too dangerous. And so a bolder, stranger idea took shape, and Napoleon embraced it eagerly. strike at Britain indirectly by seizing Egypt. Egypt was nominally part of the Ottoman Empire but loosely controlled, and it sat astride the routes that linked Britain to its growing empire in India. Take Egypt, the thinking went, and France could threaten Britain's wealth in the east, while also winning glory in the land of the pharaohs. For a man who modeled himself on Alexander the Great and the heroes of the ancient world, the lure of the East was irresistible. In May of 1798, Napoleon sailed from the south of France with a vast fleet, around 400 ships carrying tens of thousands of soldiers. And, in a detail that tells you everything about how he saw himself, he also brought scholars. More than 150 scientists, engineers, artists, and historians sailed with the army, sent to study and document this ancient land. On the way, the expedition seized the island of Malta, brushing aside the old crusading order of knights that had held it for centuries. Then the fleet sailed on across the Mediterranean, slipping past the British warships hunting for it, and in early July it reached the coast of Egypt. The army landed and pushed inland toward Cairo through brutal heat, short of water and tormented by an enemy unlike any they had faced. Egypt was dominated by the Mamluks, a warrior caste of magnificent, fearless cavalry, the proud descendants of an old military elite. On the 21st of July, 1798, the two worlds collided within sight of the ancient pyramids, in what became known as the Battle of the Pyramids. Napoleon formed his infantry into great hollow squares, bristling with bayonets and muskets on every side, walls of disciplined fire that the Mamluk horsemen could not break. The charging cavalry was cut down in waves. It was a crushing French victory, and before it Napoleon is said to have pointed to the monuments and told his men that 40 centuries of history were looking down upon them. He took Cairo. For one shining moment he was the master of Egypt. And then, in 2 days, the whole adventure turned into a trap. The British Navy had been searching the Mediterranean for the French fleet, and its commander was a brilliant, relentless admiral named Horatio Nelson. Remember that name because Nelson will haunt this entire series. On the 1st and 2nd of August 1798, Nelson found the French warships anchored in a bay near the mouth of the Nile, at a place called Abu Qir. What followed was not a battle so much as a destruction. Nelson attacked at dusk and through the night, daringly sailing part of his fleet between the anchored French ships and the shore, catching them from both sides. The French flagship, a giant of a vessel, blew up in a colossal explosion that observers said could be heard for miles. By morning, almost the entire French fleet had been captured or destroyed. This was the Battle of the Nile, and its consequence was simple and devastating. Napoleon and his army were now stranded in Egypt, cut off from France by an enemy that ruled the sea between them. The victory electrified Europe. Britain, which had stood almost alone, suddenly had proof that the great Napoleon could be beaten and that France could be humbled. New alliances began to form. Austria, Russia, the Ottoman Empire, and others started to come together into what historians call the Second Coalition, a fresh ring of enemies closing around France. And while Napoleon was pinned in the deserts of the East, this Second Coalition would go on the attack in Europe, even rolling back his hard-won conquests in Italy. The general who had broken the First Coalition was now trapped a sea away while the second one gathered strength. Napoleon, never one to sit still, tried to turn the situation around by marching east out of Egypt into Syria, partly to strike at the Ottomans before they could strike at him. The campaign became a nightmare. In 1799, his army reached the walls of a fortified coastal town called Acre and laid siege to it. But Acre was supplied and reinforced from the sea by the British, and Napoleon, with no fleet and no heavy siege guns, could not break it. Assault after assault failed. Worse, plague broke out among his soldiers, and the desert march had already worn them down. After weeks of futile effort, he was forced to do something he hated. He gave up and turned back. The retreat to Egypt, through heat and sickness, was grim, and it left a stain on his record of unbroken success. Acre was the first time the world watched Napoleon try something and simply fail. By the summer of 1799, his position was impossible. His fleet was gone, his Syrian gamble had collapsed, and reports trickling in from Europe told him that France itself was in deep trouble, hard-pressed by the Second Coalition and badly governed by a directory that was sinking into corruption and weakness. The conqueror of Italy was stuck guarding a desert he could no longer escape. His glory tarnished, his army wasting away. A lesser man might have gone down with the expedition. Napoleon made a colder calculation. France needed a savior, and a tarnished hero at home was worth far more than a trapped one abroad. And so, in August of 1799, he did something that was either brilliant or shameful, depending on how you look at it. Quietly, telling almost no one, he handed command of the stranded army to one of his generals, slipped aboard a fast ship with a few chosen companions, and sailed for France, leaving tens of thousands of his men behind in Egypt. Once again, he eluded the British patrols, and after a tense voyage, he stepped ashore in the south of France in October. He had, in a sense, abandoned his army. But news traveled slowly, and the news that reached France first was not the failure at Acre or the disaster on the Nile. It was the legend of the pyramids. The conqueror of Italy returned at last from the mysterious East. So let us take stock as we did before. In just a few short years, the rising star of Paris has become a continental celebrity. He has dismantled the First Coalition, redrawn the map of Italy, and made his name immortal, while also suffering his first real defeat and stranding an army in the sands of Egypt. He has learned that there is a limit to what speed and genius can do when the sea itself belongs to your enemy, a lesson he will spend the rest of his life refusing to fully accept. And now he is back in France, hailed as a hero, at the exact moment that a tired, frightened, badly run republic is desperate for a strong hand to save it. A brilliant general with an unbeatable reputation, walking into a power vacuum. You can already feel where this is going. Within weeks of stepping ashore, Napoleon Bonaparte would gamble everything on a different kind of battle, not against the armies of Austria, but against the government of France itself. He would reach for power directly, and whether that gamble made him the savior of the Republic or its gravedigger is exactly where our next episode begins. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in episode 3.